They erased this from history. 10,000 Nigerian women versus the British Empire. No guns, no international support, just unity, courage, and palm branches. For 6 weeks in 1929, they brought an empire to its knees. This is the story they tried to bury. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment. Let's get into it. November 1929, southeastern Nigeria. Over 10,000 women marched on colonial government buildings, wielding palm branches and chanting war songs. They surrounded warrant chiefs' homes, destroyed colonial courts, and attacked European factories. For weeks, they held their ground against an empire that ruled a quarter of the world. This wasn't a protest. This was a full-scale revolt. And it almost worked. But here's what's crazy. Most people have never heard of the Aba Women's Riot, one of the largest anti-colonial uprisings in African history, led entirely by women. Today, we're telling their story. This is history that refused to be silenced. When we think about resistance to colonialism, we usually hear about men, armed rebellions, military leaders, political movements. But in 1929, thousands of Igbo and Ibibio women in Nigeria showed the world a different kind of power. They didn't have guns. They didn't have formal organization. What they had was unity, traditional authority, and a rage that had been building for years under British colonial rule. The British called it a riot, a word designed to diminish what actually happened. But make no mistake, this was a calculated, strategic uprising that shook the British Empire and changed the course of Nigerian history. To understand why these women revolted, we need to go back to how Britain was ruling Nigeria in the first place. In the early 1900s, Britain controlled Nigeria through a system called indirect rule. Instead of directly governing millions of people, they appointed local leaders called warrant chiefs to do their dirty work. Here's the problem. In Igbo society, leadership was traditionally decentralized and democratic. Decisions were made by councils of elders, and women held significant power through their own political structures. But the British didn't care about traditional governance. They handpicked men, often corrupt, sometimes outsiders, gave them absolute authority and backed them with colonial force. These warrant chiefs became tyrants. They collected taxes for the British, settled disputes in colonial courts, controlled trade and movement, and had the power to imprison people. And because they answered only to British officials, there was no accountability. They extorted money, seized property, and abused their power with impunity. But here's what really pushed things over the edge. Under this new system, women lost all their traditional political power. In pre-colonial Igbo society, women had their own governance structures. They held meetings, made collective decisions, and had the authority to sanction men who mistreated women or violated community norms. This practice was called sitting on a man, a form of social protest where women would gather at an offender's home singing songs of ridicule until justice was served. The British colonial system erased all of this. Women went from having institutional power to having none. By 1929, tensions were at a breaking point. And then the British made a fatal mistake. In October 1929, rumors spread across southeastern Nigeria. The British were planning to tax women. Men were already being taxed, and those taxes were crushing. But taxing women, that crossed the line. On November 23, 1929, in a small town called Oloko, a warrant chief named Ogugo sent a census officer to count people and livestock. A woman named Nwanierua was in her compound when the officer arrived. He told her to count her livestock and family members. She knew what this meant. They were preparing to tax women. Nwanierua refused. An argument erupted. According to accounts, Emererua grabbed her. She fought back. But Nwanierua didn't just fight back physically, she did something more powerful. She mobilized. Nwanierua went to the local women's meeting and reported what happened. The women immediately invoked their traditional practice of sitting on a man. They marched to Emererua's home and to Warrant Chief Ogugo's compound. They danced. They sang songs of ridicule. They demanded justice. But this time, something was different. Women from neighboring villages heard what was happening and joined in. Then women from towns further away came. The movement spread like wildfire. Within days, what started as a local protest became a regional uprising. By late November, the protest had grown massive. Women were organizing across ethnic lines. Igbo and Ibibio women united in their anger. The women used brilliant tactics. They sent palm fronds as signals between villages, a traditional call to action. Within hours, thousands of women would gather at specific locations. They often protested at night, making it harder for colonial authorities to respond. They would surround warrant chiefs' homes, singing, dancing, and preventing anyone from entering or leaving. They burned warrant chiefs' homes. They destroyed colonial courts, the buildings where colonial justice was administered. The women looted European trading factories, especially those that had exploited local trade. The women didn't attack randomly. They targeted warrant chiefs who were particularly corrupt, courts that had been especially unjust, and trading companies that had cheated local traders. The women had clear demands: abolish the warrant chief system, remove all taxes on women, remove corrupt and abusive warrant chiefs, and restore women's traditional authority. The uprising spread to over 6,000 square miles. Major towns affected included Aba, Owerri, Umuahia, Ikot-Ekene, and Opobo. At its peak, an estimated 25,000 women were actively involved. Colonial records show that 16 native courts were attacked or destroyed. The British were completely caught off guard. They had never seen anything like this. Women, traditionally seen as powerless in colonial eyes, were shutting down entire regions. District officers sent panic telegrams to Legos. Situation serious, women uncontrollable, request military assistance. The British didn't understand what they were dealing with. They called it a riot, implying chaos and irrationality. But this was organized resistance using traditional forms of protest adapted to colonial oppression. On December 10, 1929, the situation reached its tragic climax. In the towns of Opoba and Aba, thousands of women gathered to protest. The British authorities, fearing complete loss of control, made a devastating decision. They ordered colonial troops to open fire on unarmed protesters. Eyewitness accounts describe scenes of horror. Women singing and dancing were suddenly met with rifle fire. Some tried to run. Others stood their ground, refusing to be intimidated, even as bullets flew. When the shooting stopped, at least 55 women were killed, and 50 were wounded. Some sources suggest the actual death toll was much higher, but colonial records deliberately undercounted casualties. The British claimed the women were rioting and posed a threat, but the evidence tells a different story. Unarmed women, many carrying palm branches as symbols of protest, were massacred for demanding justice. The shootings sent shock waves through the region, but instead of ending the protests, it solidified the women's resolve. They had paid the ultimate price, and their sacrifice could not be in vain. International attention finally turned to Nigeria. Newspapers in Britain and America reported on the massacre. Anti-colonial activists seized on the story. The British Empire, which prided itself on civilizing Africa, had just gunned down dozens of unarmed African women. Facing international pressure and continued unrest, the British government was forced to act. In early 1930, the colonial government established a commission to investigate the uprising. For the first time, British officials actually listened to Nigerian women. Testimonies revealed the depth of colonial abuse: warrant chiefs extorting money and goods, women being sexually harassed at checkpoints, unfair taxation crushing local economies, and the complete exclusion of women from governance. The commission's findings were damning, even if the colonial government tried to downplay them. The uprising forced real changes. The most abusive warrant chiefs were removed and the system was restructured. The British officially abandoned any plans to tax women. For the first time, colonial authorities acknowledged that women needed political representation. Trading practices were reformed to reduce exploitation.
But the impact went beyond immediate reforms. The Aba Women's Riot inspired anti-colonial movements across Africa. It established a tradition of women's political activism in Nigeria that continues today. The uprising became a symbol of resistance against oppression. Here's what bothers me about this story. It's one of the most significant anti-colonial uprisings in African history. Yet most people, even many Nigerians, don't know about it. Why was it forgotten? Several reasons. Gender bias, the colonial narrative calling it a riot, a lack of written records from the women, and post-colonial politics not prioritizing women's history. We should know their names. Nwanye Rua, the woman whose confrontation sparked the uprising. Akonya, a leader from Maloko, who helped organize early protests. Nwanye Dia, a prominent leader in the Owerri region. Nugo, an organizer in Aba, who coordinated multiple villages. These women were strategic thinkers, organizers, and revolutionaries. They deserve to be remembered. So what can we learn from the Aba Women's Riot nearly a century later? Power doesn't always come from weapons. The women had unity, traditional knowledge, and moral authority. Women's resistance has been erased, so we must question whose histories get told. Economic oppression has limits. Sacrifice creates change, and local knowledge matters. In November and December 1929, thousands of Nigerian women stood up against one of the most powerful empires in history. They didn't have international support, media coverage, or weapons. What they had was each other, and that was enough. They paid a terrible price, but they won something crucial. They proved that colonial power wasn't absolute. They forced changes that improved millions of lives, and they created a legacy of women's resistance that echoes through Nigeria to this day. The Aba Women's Riot should be taught in every history class. These women were heroes, and their story deserves to be told. History belongs to those who refuse to let it be forgotten.